assumption with get is that nothing changes. So when you use a get, all you're doing is retrieving information, but it doesn't change anything in the database. So this has a practical purpose. It means that you can't accidentally bookmark a page where you bought an item, and then someone who just clicks it might accidentally buy that item for you if you were to use get. If you were to use get for such a thing, obviously you don't want to do that. With a post, the implication there is that the data is some kind of irreversible transaction, meaning you're actually doing something to the site. You're updating it or editing it or something like that. By default, if you don't specify the method, it will use a get. Any questions?
Would there be an indicator for get if they had reached the maximum limit?
The question was, will there be an indicator if they've reached the maximum limit? I also don't know, but my intuition is that the server will probably throw an error. The server or possibly even the client. Okay, so yeah, use this method of request object for extracting information sent by a client. Okay, so here is an example form. So we've got a form action sample servlet 3 params. Now we've got 3 inputs here. It asks for a first name, last name, and class name. After which it submits to this servlet. And on the servlet side, we've got so this is what the form will look like on the side. And on the server side, we have something like this. It says do get here because the form uses the get method by default. So what this does is all it does is it just prints out what the parameters you passed were. So it prints out first name, last name, and nickname, and class name. So Servlet code using post, this is pretty much similar. All it did was it passed the request to the do get. So please note that get and post functionally, the do get and do post methods are functionally the same. The only difference is really how the data was sent by the client. So you can do this and it will all turn out just fine because it will still use HTTP servlet request and .get parameter, etc., etc. How do you do stuff? Which involves the requests? You can actually get stuff like you can get the IP address of a client by using request.getRemoteAddr. You can use request.getRemoteHost to get the host name. You can even get the client's platform and browser info. So request.getHeader user agent. User agent is a request header which tells you what client the client was using to access the page. Now, can anyone think of good cases when you would need these things? Anyone? When would you want to get the IP address or the remote host or the user agent? Okay, so this is just one example. This is not the only reason, but one reason you might want the IP address would be to log use, like maybe someone from this IP address. Okay, if your Facebook account has ever been hacked, or you're going to get a message saying someone from this IP address was hacking was trying to log into your Facebook account, and then then Facebook will use some geolocation to find out the rough area where this hacker was coming from. So it might tell you that this hacker was in Greece, or maybe it will be even as accurate as the street, depending on how good the lookup is. Let's see. Okay, then for getting the user agent, if you've ever used the internet in the 90s, you got a lot of sites which told you this site requires you to use this browser, please come back with the other browser. This is how they did it. They used some form of checking of the header to tell you what browser you're on. Which is why it's also very easy to forge what kind of browser you're on. That's why browsers now can just identify themselves as other browsers. So this is already an aside, but please don't design your sites in such a way that they depend on the browser. Okay, any questions so far? Am I making sense to everyone? Okay. So Servlet can get server's information. So yeah, you can also get the server name and the server port. This is pretty self-explanatory. You can, it lets you get the name of the server that the client is accessing. So a request URL looks like this. You've got the host, the port. So this is where you would put something like google.com. You put the port, so 8080 or 80 or whatever. By default, if you don't supply this, it goes to port 80. Then the request path, where you put all the /news or /whatever. Question mark followed by the query string. This is where you pass parameters such as ID or stuff like that. So, okay, so there are slides that explain it. So yeah, the context path will actually concatenate. The context path concatenates everything from the host all the way up to the root of the application. So this is where all your servlets are located. After which, hello1/greeting.jsp. Let's see, the servlet path corresponds to the alias that activated the component, meaning that it just includes the JSP or the servlet name or whatever. And the path info, let's see, the part that's not part of the context path or the servlet path. That's the part which is not a servlet or a JSP or whatever. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so then we've got the query string, which is comprised of a set of parameters and values entered by a user. And you can have query strings that are generated either by explicitly putting them in a page using, for instance, you can just hard code them using href, etc., or they can get created by they can get created by a form when you submit via get method. Okay. So request attributes, objects associated by a request, meaning that you can actually set more attributes than what you've seen. When would you want to use this? You would do this if you were like passing the request around and you wanted to pass information in the request. More concrete example, let's see here. Basically, you can set any kind of attribute in the request. So you can say request.setAttribute, a name followed by Miguel or whatever. It doesn't have to be a string. It can be anything you want. This serves the purpose of allowing you to pass information from across different servlets. If you're, for instance, if you're forwarding the request to some other servlet. Any questions? You guys get the concept of forwarding to other servlets? Yeah, okay. Okay, accessing attributes. So, similar to set attribute, you can also get attribute. It will return null if the attribute does not exist. And similar with parameters, you can use get attribute names to tell you what attributes have been passed. Please make sure you don't confuse get parameter with get attribute. Those are different. So parameters are the thing that you get from the users. Attributes are things that are set server side for the purpose of forwarding the request around different servlets. Okay. Okay. Yeah, set attribute. You can also remove an attribute. Any questions about attributes? Okay. Okay. HTTP request. How much time do we have? Okay. HTTP request headers. So here are some examples of things that you can have inside HTTP headers. So there's the get followed by the host, followed by the query string method. Now these are just sample headers. You can look up if you're really interested in finding out what information a client could be sending. I recommend you look it up. You look up the spec somewhere, but you can. But these are some common ones. Accept will tell you what file types the client is expecting. Meaning that if the client sends this header, it's hoping but you don't have to send back a GIF or a JPEG. When is this useful? This is useful if, for instance, you don't know whether to return a JSON file or an XML file. Or in this example, if you don't know whether to return a GIF or a TIF or whatever, the client's accept header might give you a hint about what file type to return. Again, this isn't a requirement for you with those types. It's just a hint. Accept encoding also tells you that it will accept your return encoded in this case in gzip format. Connection keep alive means that it'll keep your connection alive explicitly, meaning that it's not going to time out. preferably. Again, this is also a hint and not something that you have to adhere to. Cookie. Yeah, cookies will store cookies. I think you're all familiar with cookies, right? Okay. Host is the host that you're trying to access. The referrer is the page that the client just came from. So this is how people can prevent stuff like hot linking. If you've ever tried leeching an image from another website, and then maybe you'll get an image saying no image leeching or whatever. This is how they did it. They checked the referrer, and then if the referrer was not from their own domain, it would return some other thingy. And again, the referrers are easily forged, so please don't use this as some kind of security, like to make sure that your site is only accessible from if you access it from another page on the site. Don't do it that way. It's not secure. And also take note of the misspelling. It's refer with a single R. Whoever invented HTTP actually misspelled this. Please take note of that. You have to misspell it if you want it to work. And user agent will tell you what browser the person is using. Any questions? Okay. Okay. Here are explanations of cookie, refer, user agent. Okay. And you can get the headers this way. Get header. You can also get headers to get a list of all the headers. Get header names, and get int header will just basically automatically parses it for you in case it's an integer. So basically it's just a convenience method. Any questions regarding these? Okay. So headers are not all. So again, these are all samples. None of these are required. Well, some of them are required. This one is required, but none of these are required in the header, which is why we have methods that let you check which ones were sent. Okay. Okay. Sample code for this is also a bit tricky because a lot of it involves things that are underlying and not really visible on the web page. So I didn't actually make any sample code for this one. Okay, but this is a pretty basic sample. So it just tells you what method they used, get request URI. It's pretty straightforward. It's all a bunch of get statements, and then you pass in the name to tell what information the client had passed to you. Okay, that's what this code does. It will print it all out as a table. Okay. Okay, any questions before I move on to servlet responses? Regarding servlets. So regarding the responses, the responses contain data which are passed from the servlet to the client. Typically, all you'll need is the output stream, and then you just write to it. Maybe you'll want to indicate what type it returned. So texts, HTML, etc. Tell it whether or not to buffer output. Set localization information, and you can also set status codes. So yeah, so the responses can be forwarded. Servlet 1, Servlet 2, Servlet 3. You can just continually build on the responses. Any questions so far? Okay, so here's what a sample response looks like. If you've done web development before, then most of you will. What it usually looks like is that it's only this stuff that gets returned. But actually, all this stuff is getting returned too. It's just that your browsers don't show this to you. This is actually included. Not all. Again, like with the request headers, not all of these are required. But the server is going to be returning a whole bunch of these, and the browser doesn't actually necessarily show you. Okay. Any questions regarding response headers? Okay, so I'll just briefly give a rundown of what the possible HTTP response status codes are, as well as some common headers. So 1XX, so 100, 101, etc. It's informational. It just means the request was received and the process is continuing. 2XX, so 200 is the most common one. 200 means successful, and that's the response code that you're getting for almost anything you do. 3xx redirection. This usually tells the browser to automatically go to some other website. The server will usually provide you with a URL which it was redirected to. 4xx, so this is where the famous 404 comes in. It means that the request contains bad syntax or cannot be fulfilled, which includes URLs not existing at all. Okay, and 5xx means server error. It means that nothing is wrong with your request, but the server screwed up somewhere. Maybe it threw an exception in one of its apps or something. And this is actually the kind of error that you'll be returning if your app crashes on a request that was valid. So you can actually see there are many more status codes. You can see them all if you just look at the HTTP Servlet Response interface. Okay, so you can also use the status codes in sendError methods. These methods generate an error page. With descriptive messages for the specified status code. Generally, I don't like using these. I tend to make my own. We tend to make our own error pages, but well, this one is a lot simpler if you're just prototyping something. Okay, so yeah, catch file not found has the same effect as. Yeah, okay. So these two are equivalent. You can use sendError to just do setStatus not found and output file is missing. Any questions so far? Okay, so now just briefly discuss some common HTTP response headers. So these are methods. So you can set content type, content length, cookie, and redirect. So content type will tell you yes. Sorry. Okay. Content type will tell you what type you just sent. So you'll be telling the client, I just sent you a text file, I just sent you an XML file, etc. Content length will tell you how long the content is, and this is used for persistent HTTP connections, meaning that it will help the client figure out how long to keep the connection alive if it's one of those connections that's supposed to stay alive forever or for a very long time. Add cookie will add cookies. Will allow you to add cookies, and send redirect will send a 300 something code, and will instruct the client to go to another page to view it. Yeah, okay. So the MIME type of the document being returned. So content type again is the MIME type. I discussed this just a moment ago. Last modified is another header which you can also set. It tells you what time the document was last changed. Okay, a servlet almost always returns a response body, and it can be done through a print writer or a servlet output stream. So print writer is what you'll commonly be using. This is what you use if you're outputting text or whatever. But sometimes you want to output binary data. If you're generating an image on the fly, then you will want to use a servlet output stream. Before I wrap up, any questions? Okay, one last thing. In real life, it's actually rare that we code servlets directly, unless we really need to handle it at a low level. What this means is that servlets are actually just the building blocks for bigger and better tools which we use. So when you see a web page that was written with some Java framework, it's very unlikely that these people were actually coding servlets the way I showed you. What they are using is they're using other technologies that are built on servlets by other people. So this could be struts, and then let's see, Spring and Hibernate are a topic for another day. But there are much better frameworks which involve JSPs. Some even involve their own templating systems like JSTL, etc. And those are actually what you want to use. Why did we talk about servlets? We're talking about servlets because they are the basic building block on which all of these are being done on. Even though people use struts, which makes things easier, struts itself is still built on top of servlets, and it's important to have a good handle on how things are built from the bottom up. Okay, and let's see. So one last question. when should we use our own? When should we code servlets on our own instead of using one of these higher level frameworks? Well, there are actually a few use cases. The most common use case is actually if you are developing your own framework. If you're making your own competitor to struts or whatever, then sure, go ahead and use servlets. Otherwise, there isn't really a good reason why you should use servlets as the basic as your framework for writing web apps. Okay. So these are the resources which. These are the sources which, if anyone wants to copy them, they're right there. But otherwise, that just about wraps up my talk. Is there anyone with any questions about anything? Come on, this is already the end, so.